Good afternoon and welcome to NorCal PTAC's webinar in partnership with the Port of San Francisco. It's called Doing Business with Construction Primes in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is James Forrest. I'm the Program Coordinator and Procurement Specialist with NorCal PTAC. Talk about what NorCal PTAC is in a second. We have two more NorCal PTAC folks who are primary hosting today. Edward Duarte, who is our Construction and Public Works Specialist, and Thomas Burns, who is one of our excellent procurement specialists. So they're going to be giving the main part of the presentation. We're also going to hear from Stephanie Tang, the Port of SF. I'll let her talk in a minute today. But first, I just want to describe what NorCal PTAC is very briefly. NorCal PTAC is the Northern California Procurement Technical Assistance Center. We are one center in a network of centers across the whole country. There's about 96 of us. Basically, we're nonprofit programs set up with funding from the federal and state and local governments in order to provide free assistance for government contracting assistance for small businesses. So you can see this is our service area. If you have a business in this service area, and hopefully most of you do if you're joining this webinar today, since we're focusing on San Francisco construction primes. If you're in this service area, we invite you to apply. It doesn't cost you anything. We don't charge anything for any of our services, and we've helped our clients in last year alone win more than $500 million. A billion with a B, so $500 million. We really like to get these contract dollars. Sometimes they can go to the big businesses. If you have giant businesses, they have entire procurement departments, and they're kind of a shoe-in for easy contracting for certain departments. But departments do want to do business with small business. It just requires a lot of training. So you need to learn the ropes, and that's where we come in. We demystify all sorts of procurement topics, and we do that in a number of ways. So if you apply and you're accepted, we can assign you to a procurement specialist. You could sit down with them, have a one-on-one meeting on Zoom. Hopefully more in person as well in the Bay Area in the future. And this is our one-on-one counseling sessions. You can go over just about any topic related to procurement. So if you're looking into just doing some market research, if you want to get registered in SAM, Cal eProcure, if you want to get certified, if you want to get WOSB certified, or if you're a disabled veteran or just small business certified, those are all things, just a tiny slice of what we can help with. Bidding on contracts, finding contract opportunities, staying compliant, preparing your capability statement, really A to Z, cradle to grave assistance with contracting. We can also set you up, this is the second thing, with a custom bid matching profile. This is a program that we pay for, then we offer to you for free. What it does is it scours the whole internet automatically using robots to find the best opportunities that match what you sell, and then it sends it right to your inbox, and you can click on a nice list of hyperlinked opportunities that match the criteria that you work out with your specialist. So ideally, the way it would work is if you sell fences or you build fences, that you would wake up each morning with a list of opportunities that mention something about fences or post hole digging and things like that. The third thing that we do regularly for our clients, but we also do it for everyone, is we put on resources and trainings. So those of you who have joined today know that you haven't had to pay for anything. You didn't have to verify any sort of geographical location. So everyone is free to join. You don't have to be in the service area. Free to join our events and our webinars. These are also all, as I mentioned before, all posted on our website. If you go to our website, norcalptech.org, click on the resources tab and scroll down to past webinars. You're going to find every webinar that we put on in the last 5 years. It's a really invaluable resource. It's pretty great. We'll have the video as well as the slides, and that's where this session today is going to go as well. So that's also where you can sign up for our services if you'd like to have a one-on-one session with a procurement specialist. If you're not in the service area for whatever reason, that's totally fine. You'll get hopefully you'll get something out of what we're going to present today. But you can also look up your local PTAC at that second link there, aptac-us.org. All right. Thanks so much again for everyone for joining. And thank you so much, Stephanie Tang, who is filling in for Tiffany Tatum, who was out ill today. So Stephanie is with San Francisco Port, and I'm going to hand the floor over to her briefly. So Stephanie?
Hi, James, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. You're here at this time of day because this is the regular time when the Port of San Francisco hosts our regular office hours. So if you have other questions you want to follow up with the Port about, we're always accessible. And this is a time when Port staff will always be available to answer your questions about doing business with the Port. So my name is Stephanie Tang. I'm the Contracts and Procurement Manager. My team is responsible for letting out the various contracts that you're probably interested in. And we have Tiffany Tatum, who is not able to be here today, and she's the Senior Community Development Specialist who's making sure that some of our opportunities are getting won by small businesses. And we're really excited to have the NorCal PTAC here with us because we understand that doing business with the city is not always an easy endeavor, and we want to make sure that we're able to work together. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to be talking about today. And one is on the left, on the slide, you can see what are the contracting opportunities that we have coming up. I'm also going to drop into the chat some links which are going to connect you with the various contract. We recently held a contracting open house. So all the recordings, all the slide decks, all the various opportunities, if you want to know more about the Port, will be available there. So thank you very much and welcome.
And we lost slides, so I'm just going to go and reshare those real quick. My apologies. All right, hopefully everyone can see that now. Okay, that looks like it's working for me now. Okay, so that is our intro spiel. Thanks again to Stephanie stepping in on short notice, and thanks again to the partnership with SF Port. We really appreciate working with you guys and working with local agencies all throughout our service area. So we are going to be handing things over to start things off with Ed Duarte. So Ed, why don't you go ahead and take the floor? As I mentioned before, Ed is one of our procurement specialists. He is our construction and public works specialist, has a lot of experience in the industry, and so you're in good hands with him. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, James. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to have our attendees participating in this workshop, and we hope that we're going to be able to present some information that will be of relevant benefit to you if you're interested in bidding on work for the Port. And actually, the comments that I'm going to be making in my presentation, they apply to every single public works project in California, because every agency, from the Port to Caltrans to BART to Alameda County Public Works to AC Transit, etc., any and every agency that gets tax money to fund its capital improvement program is subject to the California Public Contract Code. And that code has a series, a standard requirements of every construction contractor in California that wants to bid on public works. Very specific requirements, which I'm going to go into now. So next slide, please. What we want to talk about today is understanding the bid and the pricing process and the typical bid format for both primes and subcontractors. An overview on the basic protocol and process of submitting a bid, submitting a sub-bid. And I'm going to come back to that point for a second. Understand how to develop a professional and credible scope letter and a capability statement. And we're going to give you a list of some of the prime firms that operate in San Francisco County and have been doing business with the Port. And I want to reemphasize that this workshop is designed for construction contractors. Now, we're not trying to discriminate against architectural and engineering firms, construction management firms. The reason that we have to separate the two categories is that the process of submitting and winning a contract for construction management services or design is completely different than submitting a bid for a construction project. Two different planets, two different criteria, two different reports. Everything is it's just not the same. So, and they both deserve a lot of attention and detail when we put on these workshops. So today, we only have time to do the construction contractor. So those of you who are not licensed contractors, you're more than welcome to stay. I want you to stay. I hope you stay. I think you'll learn something from it, but everything we're going to be talking about applies to construction, prime and subcontractors. So next slide, please. There are basic requirements that apply for all of us. And I say us because I am a retired general contractor. I've been in the business for it's such a long time, I'm almost embarrassed to say. Over 50 years, folks. Over 50 years, and always as a prime. And 98% of our company volume is public works. So everything I'm going to talk about, show you, and tell you this afternoon comes from boots on the ground experience. Okay, the basics. These are set by the California Public Contract Code. If you're going to bid on a project for the port, for any other agency, you have to have a license, either as a prime, a general, which would be an A or a B, or a C specialty for a subcontractor. You must register with the Department of Industrial Relations. That registration costs $400 per year. If you are a prime, you have to be registered when you submit your bid. If you are a sub, you will need to get registered before you are awarded your subcontract. You have to have the required liability insurance and plus workers' comp. We cannot pay our workers piecework like we do in the private sector. There is no such thing as I'll pay you by the square foot, or I'll pay you by every cubic yard of concrete you pay. No, everybody has to be paid by the hour. Again, I'm talking about the trade workers out there doing the work. And by the way, insurance is not a mystery, nor is it a deterrent for you to participate. Insurance requirements are posted in every single bid solicitation that goes out on the street by the port or any other agency. It's the law. They have to disclose that. They have to tell you, we're going to require this much insurance. And as far as the cost is concerned, you're not being discriminated against there, because if you don't get the job, you obviously are not going to be provided the insurance. So you put the cost of the policy in your bid. You have to pay prevailing wages to everyone. That's in Northern California, in all of California. That is interpreted by the DIR, Department of Industrial Relations, as union scale. Everybody working on a public works project is going to be paid union scale. Period. End of discussion. No waivers allowed. You have to comply with the apprenticeship regulations. Again, it's in the contract, and it's handed down by the legislature. The pay procedure, I make mention of this because for those of you who might be coming from the private sector, you're used to the possibility of getting a deposit up front or getting paid every week or every 2 weeks. The reality is you're not in public works. With public works, every agency pays once a month to the prime, and the prime has 5 business days by law to pay the subs. So since they bill once every 30 days in arrears, that simply means that at the end of the month, you submit your invoice to the prime contractor. The prime contractor submits their invoice to the owner, and the owner has 30 days to pay. So you're carrying, if you are working during that time frame, you're carrying labor, equipment, and material costs for a maximum of possibly up to 6 to 7 weeks. And with prevailing wages being paid out, it can be considerable dollars. So the net result, you need cash to become a public works contractor. You need some operating capital. Depending on the size job you're going to go after, it can be a lot or it can be a smaller amount. Any and all bid proposals submitted by the prime contractor, they must be submitted without any qualification or reservation. We as prime contractors, we have no say-so in the contract. We have no say-so in how the bid format is presented. It's published as part of the plans and specifications. And that form that a prime contractor fills out has everything there. So from the context of, is it difficult to do? Not really, if you can fill in the blanks. Coming up with the right price is obviously another story. But as far as turning in the bid, it's all spelled out, again, by every agency. They have a complete checklist that will tell you what you have to do to how you're going to submit your price proposal. For you subcontractors, different story. You're not contracting with the owner. If you're a subcontractor, you are going to be under contract to a prime. And that prime has complete control over your actions because from an attorney standpoint, subcontractors don't exist with relationship to how the owner views the project team. They acknowledge them, but if a prime is having trouble with the subcontractor, they're not going to go to the owner and say, I'm having trouble with my electrician and gee, it's really tough. They don't want to hear that. They hired one prime contractor. That's the way the contracts are written for the prime. One point of contact. And any and all team members on the general's team are going to be reporting and responsible to the prime contractor. And in the subcontract that they write, that the subcontractor has to sign and fill out, it will have all of the qualifications and requirements in the general conditions of the specs. It's what we call a flow down clause. All those requirements will simply flow downhill and they will apply to every single subcontractor as applicable for their piece of the work, their scope of work. And finally, if you are bidding as a prime, any project over $25,000 is going to have to be fully bonded. And I'm not talking about your license bond. We're talking about performance and payment bond. If a prime wants to bond a sub, they most certainly can do so. And it is purely at the prime contractor's discretion. Next slide, please. So I just talked about bonding insurance. As a prime, it's required. As a subcontractor, it can be at will. There's a pre-bid conference always. With the pandemic, we've had to live with these virtual job walks, which in my humble opinion is a joke, because there's nothing like walking the job and seeing what you're going to be bidding upon. Union, non-union issues during the bid. You should be aware that this is the Bay Area. And I could pick a number, I'm going to say 95% of the primes who bid on all of these public works projects in and around the Bay Area, the overwhelming majority of them are union generals. And if they are union general contractors, they are prohibited by their contract with the trade that they are signatory with. They are prohibited to hire non-union subcontractors. So that's good for you subcontractors who are open shop, non-union, and are not used to that, if you cannot or will not be willing to become union, then don't waste your time bidding the job. If you know that all the 3 or 4 generals bidding that particular project, they're all signatory, why are you wasting time on an estimate when even if you are competitive, they're not going to give you a contract unless you're willing to become signatory. So it's a rock and a hard place, but it becomes a business decision. It's just a point that you folks need to be aware of. And generals, we all have our networks to reach out to subs via email, via faxes, via industry trade associations. I always emphasize and tell our clients, you subcontractors need to do the same thing. You need to do your outreach to the generals. I strongly suggest that when you're thinking about bidding on a job, don't wait until a prime contacts you. If you have access to a capital improvements calendar or look ahead schedule, like the port has shown on one of our slides that these jobs are coming up, go to the website, open up those documents and take a look at the project, see if it's something in there that you want to bid on, and get ahead of the game. Don't wait for the email from the prime. Next, please. General conditions. I'm not going to go over all of these. Just let me suffice it to say that these are all not just typical. These are always all included in every contract. There will be a reference to them, from the simple things like invitation to bid, the day the bid is due, date, time, and place, bonding requirements, the bid proposal form, description of the work, on down to safety program requirements, SWIPI plans, which is erosion control plans, which are a mandated state requirement, QA, QC, project flow. All of these will be addressed in the specifications. Next, please. So how do you find work and contact the prime? Well, go to the website. Every single agency that I know of that has a decent capital improvements project program, they've got a website. They all have websites. Cities, counties, agencies, cemetery districts, school district, water districts, they all have a website. And every one I've ever looked at has a tab that says doing business with. So you simply start drilling down on that and find out if they've got any bids coming up. And I like to go by geography. If I'm a drywall contractor up in Pinole, I'm going to take a look at West Contra Costa County, the lower part of Marin County, and certainly down into Alameda County. Maybe I will travel over to San Francisco. Maybe I won't. So I'll hit those agencies and see if there's any jobs bidding on that. There's another resource that I would urge any newer contractor to make use of, and that's join your local builders exchange. Tongue-tied there, sorry. Join your local builders exchange. There's about 3 or 4 of them here in the Bay Area. They all have a weekly newsletter that lists a whole bunch of jobs that are out on the street for bid, along with all the primes who have checked out plans and who just might be bidding on it. Take a look at the project description and the engineer's estimate. And I say, well, why do you care about that? Because you got to do the math, people. It's real simple. The bigger the job, the bigger the subcontracts. And if you're a concrete contractor and you're used to doing 100,000 or 200,000 a year, I don't think you're going to be able to handle a $30 million museum that's probably going to have anywhere near a couple of $1 million worth of concrete work. So you need to take a look at the project description and see if this job fits within your capacity. Take a look at the bid form. The bid form is always included with every set of plans and specs. Take a look at the list of primes planning to bid it. If you decide it's a go, prepare your scope letter, and I'll talk about that next, and decide what you're going to bid upon. Send all the primes your unpriced scope letter and say, I will be proposing a price for painting on this project, for the electrical work, or for the concrete work, or whatever. And then start working on your estimate. And then on bid day, you finish your estimate and put your number in, and you email that or fax it over to all the primes that you want to get your price. That's the way we do it, folks. There's no other way to bid these types of projects. And again, I'll reemphasize, all public works primes and subs that have been in the business and have been doing public works, this is how we do it. Next. So what am I talking about? Scope letter is the industry jargon for subcontractor bid proposal, right? That is where you send me a letter that says, I'm going to be bidding, as I just mentioned a minute ago, I'm going to be bidding on the painting for this project. And I'm going to show you what should be in that letter. But the process, many small firms, they often feel that their bids are ignored or given second-class status, or maybe even being shopped around. But you got to remember that as a prime, I'm going to receive, evaluate, track, and post a multitude of sub-bid information as I'm putting my final bid proposal together. And over 95% of all sub-bids are submitted in the last hour before bid time. There is no such thing as turning in your bid early for a prime, for the simple reason that unless you're doing all the work yourself in-house, you are waiting on bids to come in. In our company, it's common that we're receiving bids right up until 10 minutes to bid time, to post time. That's pretty typical. Don't like it, but it's the way the game is played. Next. Your scope letter should be on your letterhead. I'm going to show you a sample. If you do your scope letter in the same format as my bid form, that's the professional way to submit your bid. And if you follow this protocol, you're going to get fair consideration and evaluation. And when I look at your scope letter, if I get to see it early, and again, I emphasize, I don't need the price early. I mean, I would like it, but you probably can't even put your price together early because you're waiting on material and equipment pricing as well. But if I see it set up in the right format, right away I know I'm bidding with a sub who understands the process. Next. Do you have any questions so far? Throwing a lot of material at you.
I don't see any already in the Q&A, so just a reminder that if you do have any questions for Ed or Thomas, you can put them in the Q&A tab and we'll read them aloud and see if we can get an answer to them during these Q&A sessions. So I'll give you guys a couple moments here. All right, well, let's keep things moving. And if you have any questions, make sure to indicate what they're about. And if it's about something that's already passed, so just let us know what we can answer later. So go ahead and take it along, Ed. Thanks.
Yeah, we have a short time frame here, folks, and I don't want to hog all the time because I have my fellow counselor teammate is Thomas Burns, and he's going to take up the back half of this presentation. So what am I talking about when I talk about bid forms and scope letters? All right, so for example,
you can take the screen control now, Ed.
Here is a sample of a bid proposal form.
If you click the screen, you should be able to scroll it. There we go.
This is what me as a prime is going to turn in on bid day. Notice that there are many bid items. Each one has to be priced separately. This is typical for heavy civil work. Actually, when it comes to buildings and structure type projects, it's a simpler bid form, quite simpler, because they'll say, we want a lump sum price. If you're bidding on that type of job, then you as a sub will simply give me a lump sum price for your particular craft, your particular trade. If you're bidding to me on a highway job, a roadway job, Caltrans job, or a wastewater treatment job, I guarantee you, you're going to see this multiple bid item format. Again, it is standard SOP with every agency. So that's one. And this one here is just another example taken from a Caltrans job. And as the job gets bigger in budget, this list gets longer. Now, our family firm typically bids on jobs the size where we bid on jobs where we get up to 100, 150 bid items, which is a logistical nightmare. I can only imagine what the big boys do when they're bidding on a Caltrans or a BART project that's 20, 30, 40, $50 million or more. And they have 2 or 3 or 400 bid items. So that's why it's very important, those of you who are bidding as subcontractors, that you understand how the prime has to format their bid and how you're going to be required to do it. Let me go back to the first one to give you a very good example. So if you're a concrete sub on this particular little project, there are, starting with item 400, oops, I lost it. My screen went dark.
Ed, I'm not sure why your screen went dark. We can all see everything fine.
Okay, well, if you take a look at item 400, 401, 402, 403, 404, those are all concrete items. So if on bid day, I got a bid from a concrete sub for one lump sum price, even though it might be the best price, I couldn't use it because I need the breakouts. Again, re-emphasizing why everybody needs to understand as a subcontractor how the prime has to bid their work. Okay, so let's go to the next one, which is the Tykert construction. I can't see what I'm doing here. I don't know why I'm blank, but I do have
your screen is actually blank or black, or
it's black.
Can you, is there a taskbar at the bottom? Can you go back to Zoom? It sounds like you might have left Zoom. Or your screen died. I'm not really sure. Now we don't have any audio.
There we go.
All right, we can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, so let's go to the next. So here's Tykert Construction is asking for bids on this Kings Beach water quality improvement project. By the way, these are older bid requests from these contractors, and I'm doing that, so I don't want to step on anybody's toes and put something out of that's privileged information. Not that any of this is, because all of these are subject to the Public Information Act. This is all out in the open, all transparent. So, and the thing I want to show you here is that the primes in there, and they will be putting some conditions that you need to be aware of as a sub. So keyword here is saying, please note it's a prevailing wage job. Everybody has to sign their standard contract, etc. And if I keep on going. There's other requirements there that you'll get a copy of this in your handouts. But it's a sample of a bid solicitation put out by the prime to the subcontractor community. This is a format sample simply detailing the information that you as a subcontractor should be putting on your scope letter. The scope letter needs to be put on your letterhead. And then you have to include this information. But the top section is obviously all the points of reference of contact, license number, address, etc. The project you're bidding on, what you're bidding on, and your pricing. Again, self-explanatory, and you'll see it in this next example. Here's an electrical contractor that turned in their sub bid proposal for the Little Primrose Preschool in San Jose. And they described their scope. They obviously, the prime needed a breakout on electrical, fire alarm, security, and low voltage. So they gave them a breakout of pricing. They acknowledged receipt of addenda. By the way, that is a very big deal because addendas are modifications to the bidding documents prior to the bid. And if you haven't seen the latest addendum on the project and you don't acknowledge that to the prime won't accept your bid because it tells me you're not current with the latest version of plans and specs. So, all right, James, I'll turn it back to you now.
Okay, let me switch this thing over here.
So those samples, and go to the next slide, please. Those samples are the way, again, I'm sorry, from a simplistic term, that's the way we do this work. So best practices, start early, make your spreadsheet, mimic the prime's bid form, send out your own request for bids, send out your unpriced scope letter early. Next. Call or email the prime's estimator, ask if they got your scope letter, ask if they have any questions about your proposed scope of work. If you have any questions, now's the time to talk. Do not call a prime on bid day. You will not get through. We're way too busy putting the bid together and evaluating sub bids to be talking to any subcontractor. Request they give you bid results after the bids are open. And if you want to make it easy for them and ensure that you're going to get a response, tell them I'll send you a little tally sheet with with four blanks for the electrical quotes, and I'll list mine. Tell me how the other electricians, what their prices were. Again, after the fact, it's not a secret anymore. Next. So be as clear and concise as possible. I talked about structuring your pricing. Make sure you reference your spec section. Always include tax and freight. Acknowledge addendums. Let me know if you have any problems with delivery and if you need unloaded requirements. If it's appropriate to offer alternate pricing, then just make sure it's clear. And I have to tell the owner how long I'm going to hold my price. And I do that simply by signing my name, because the spec will say, this solicitation will tell you right in writing that the prime contractor has to hold their price for X number of days, 30, 60, 90. Next. Worst practices, you can read these at length. I don't want to take any more of Thomas's time, but it's important that you follow industry practice in order to make sure that your letter is going to be fairly evaluated. By the way, I'm never going to sign your bid proposal, so don't waste your time formatting a letter that has a place for my signature, because I'm not going to sign it. You are going to sign my subcontract. If we get the job and we used your number and we listed you, then I'm going to send you a subcontract and you have to sign our subcontract. That's the way it works, folks. Every sub signs. If we signed every subcontractor proposal, we would never have any control over the job. So on bid day, finalize your price, send it in 45 to 60 minutes early. The next day, contact the low bidder. And if they use your number and listed you, congratulate them. And you can always follow the owner's website to see the bid results.
Great. All right. And I think we have to hand things over to Thomas. We're running pretty short on time. So let's go ahead and thank you so much, Ed. Appreciate that. Ed will be here to answer questions, so please put any questions you have in the Q&A. Thomas, if you want to take it from here. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, Thomas is one of our procurement specialists, so quite knowledgeable about more general procurement topics. So,
sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. The portion of my presentation is to follow up what Ed was talking about when it comes to making that connection with the prime and, of course, with the agency. One of the key documents is a capability statement. And so I'm going to go into the capability statement very quickly. We also have an example on the next slide. But preparing a capability statement is like a business plan for your business card for your business. So it's a no more than one page, front and back document that has the following information. So typically you have that first paragraph that captures your core capabilities. You also want to talk about what kind of certifications, if any, you have. Next slide, please. Then it jumps into, they want all of your government codes for the kind of your certifications and your codes for the industry you're in and the work you do, all laid out on one side, so it makes it easy for the contracting officer or the prime to read and analyze your company in a very quick way. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the capability statement, is it allows a prime or a contracting officer with the agency to quickly understand if this company is professional or not, based on just how they create and submit their capability statement. Next slide. So then it also it goes into talking more about your certifications, more about your key client list. And if you could jump to the next slide, it starts to talk about your past performance, your contact information, and all of this information is very important, especially having an up-to-date website, having accurate phone numbers, having an email address that is connected with the company. That gives you more of a professional look and feel versus having, as an example, a Yahoo address, which will they just have a different feeling about that, right? You're always in competition with other firms. So you want to put your best foot forward and have the correct information, and having an email address that has the designation of your company or on your website is always the best way to go. Next slide. And then here is a really good example of a firm that has a pretty good capability statement. I like the information on the past performance. I also, one of the reasons I like the way they do their past performance is they don't just simply list the company they did the work for and the value, but they give you a short but concise summary of what they did. And that's really important. That's what the primes or the contracting officers are looking for. They want a really good understanding of the kind of work you've done. What is your past performance? And a lot of people, when they do their capability statement, they make it too short. They don't give enough information. There's a way to do this so that within that one page front and back, you can still share a lot of information about your past performance. And look at how they use their images. So not all firms have the ability to do this, but in the construction area, hopefully you should have some really good images that highlight the kind of work you've done in the past. And then here on the left side, you see how everything is separated. So it makes it very easy for somebody to read and see their certifications, their DUNS, their CAGE, and all of the different codes and the kind of work they do. It's laid out in a very clear format. Any questions about the capability statement? I know I saw something, but I didn't know if that was about from what I was talking, or was that from Ed?
We don't have any questions about that right now. And
Okay.
In the interest of time, let's save the questions for the Q&A in the end. So we
Sure.
can
Let's go to the next slide.
All right.
So here we got some upcoming capital construction projects for a competitive bid with the San Francisco port. Real quickly, Stephanie, did you have any comments you wanted to make, or we can just, because I believe there's a few slides, right?
I do have a few comments that I want to make on this. Thank you.
Sure.
So here you have before you what are our upcoming capital projects. And you're probably seeing this and say, well, hey, I want to actually know more about it. And there's a couple of ways in which you can actually see a relatively detailed slide deck about this exact presentation. I've dropped it into the chat. But if you want to find all of the construction projects or even the professional services opportunities, you can go to sfport.com/small business, one word, sfport.com/small business. And that includes a link to the slide you see here, as well as webinar recordings, as well as all the presentations and fact sheets about all these upcoming projects. So that's really the way you can get some additional information. Thanks, Thomas.
Oh, you're welcome. Next slide, please. Okay, so I received this information directly from Tiffany, and this is a list of the most active primes that work within the San Francisco port. So what I did, I took the time to go to each one of their website, and then I went to each one of their LinkedIn page. And my goal was to figure out who are the general managers, or who are the estimators, who are the people who if I'm a subcontractor, I want to reach out to and build a relationship with. And these links will take you to each one of their websites where it talks about how they do business with subcontractors, or to their LinkedIn page. And from their LinkedIn page, all you have to do is click on where it says number of employees. So for Swinnerton, 99 plus, you click on where it says within LinkedIn, and it says 99 employees. You click on that, and lo and behold, you have a list of all of the employees who are connected to that company that do have a LinkedIn page. So this is a great tool and a resource to go directly to the primes that are very active and more than likely will be putting in a bid for the upcoming projects, and then how to reach them and how to do business with their the estimators and other people who are really active in working with the subcontractors. Next slide, please. I think that was it. And remember, you're going to get all of these slides, so those links will be available. And if you have any questions about this information, we're always available to work with you.
That's absolutely right. And Thomas, thanks so much for putting in the research on that. That's kind of a treasure trove there, all of these links. So you'll get these all to be posted to our website, as I mentioned. So yeah, thanks for doing that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We have a little bit of time left for questions. Just want to really briefly, mostly just gesture towards our online calendar. We have a couple events with the Office of Small Business Development with California DGS coming up next week, Tuesday and Thursday. You can join those, how to do business with California. And if you're certified, what do you do then? Then we've got an intro webinar on June 9th, just introduction to government contracting for folks who are new. So please take a look at those. Those are always free to join on our website, just like this one. So, all right, some questions. Looks like we do have some questions here. First, let's have the first question is for Stephanie. Stephanie, are all SF port projects done by union primes?
Given that the port is located in the city and county of San Francisco, it is extremely likely that the prime is going to be a union shop.
Okay, great. We have a question from Genia Brown, who's asking, we are a small business providing permitting, processing, compliance service. This seems to be a specialized niche, and the service, permit, expediter, runner, consultant, is not typically listed in either the subcontractor or service provider fields. What's the best course of action for our micro SB to connect with appropriate contacts to pursue opportunities? And then they're certified in a number of ways.
What was the type of business again?
They provide permit processing and compliance services.
Really not going to be applicable.
Sorry?
It's not really going to be applicable. The port will have their own permitting experts, and the contractor is simply required to go pick up a permit. It's not a service that a GC would typically use, and it's a service that's out there, but it's most often used on the private projects.
This is Stephanie. I was going to echo that I have not seen permit processing and compliance services used on pure public projects. The only place that I've seen it used are on private public partnerships, primarily in housing, and those kind of larger multi-building types of projects. The typical projects that you would see, though, public works projects, this would not be a service that would be used.
All right, thanks for your question, Genia. Sorry for the bad news. All right, any other questions while we have before 5:30?
But can I add to my response, which is that
Sure.
The port is an unusual public entity in that we both have both public as well as private and public partnerships. There are a couple of very large public-private partnerships, including the Mission Rock project, which is a multi-use housing development, as well as the Pier 70 project, as well as some other projects that we have online. And I can send a link in the chat, as well as the other links that I'd sent to sfport.com/small business. If you go there, one of the links that you will see is for a presentation about our private developments and specifically what's coming online. So perhaps that'll be useful to the person who asked the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Do we have any other questions from our audience here? All right. Maybe I'll put a question. Just for review here. Some of what both of you, Ed, you and Thomas, have mentioned is the necessity for having some capital and some past performance. Do you have any advice for companies who aren't quite there yet, but who are still have their sights set on contracting?
Well, my advice has always been the same for the, I call them emerging contractors, that they want to get their feet wet in this public sector, is they too often get caught up in the going after the big jobs. Take a look at your local school district and your local recreation districts and look for the smaller projects. The odds are that your scope of work could conceivably be under $50,000 as a sub. And you can probably handle the cash flow on that and certainly handle the physical work. So you need to have cash in the bank or a line of credit. You just can't operate in the public sector without it. And I strongly recommend going after projects you can handle. Don't overextend yourself.
Absolutely.
I would echo that, but one of the things I run into a lot, going back to that capability statement, and just expanding on it, is a lot of my clients, they have a lot of past performance, but because it wasn't with a government entity, they feel it's not valuable enough. And I have to stress, no, let's break down exactly what you did. You know, how long was the work? What was the value of the work? And being able to describe it in a way that would impress or get the attention of contracting officers. So it's not always about you have to get government contract work to get started, but the work you do in the private sector can be used as quality past performance to get you noticed.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. We have one last question here. Is mobilization money to the primes ever shared with subs? This would be a question for Ed.
I'm sorry, repeat it.
Is mobilization money for the primes ever shared with subs?
Yes, occasionally, especially if there's a mobilization bid item, and there usually is on the bigger jobs. The owners have recognized that it takes cash just to set up and, i.e. mobilize. The smarter subcontractors will structure their bid format to include a mobilization item expense. There are a lot of generals that are reluctant to do that, but if you go from day one on your scope letter, you've got it broken out. The chances are you will get some operating capital. But again, remember, you're not going to get that mobilization money until after you've mobilized.
It's a paradox, Schrodinger's paradox. So yeah, you need the money to start. You don't get the money until you started. All right. Well, thanks. I think that wraps it up for today. Thanks again to Stephanie and SF Port for joining us as a partner on this webinar. Thanks again to everyone in the audience, and thanks to our presenters, Ed and Thomas, for making it possible. And we hope to see you at future events. And we'll be emailing everyone who registered tomorrow morning at some point with a link to the slides as well as the video recording. And I believe as you are exiting, you should also be redirected towards a survey. That survey, if it's working today, should just take a couple seconds to fill out. Let us know how you felt about today's webinar. So we hope you see us at future webinars. So have a good rest of your day and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.